Good morning, everyone. Okay, we are 2 seconds before we start. Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Gladys Mezrahi. I'm Commissioner of the City of Aventura. I'm also the CEO of Indigo Events. And today's guest is Honorable Luz Weinberg. Hi, Luz.
Hello. Good morning.
Let me read a little bit of who Luz is, besides being my mentor.
Thank you, Gladys. Ditto.
So the Honorable Luz Weinberg has been my friend since 2004, when she was campaigning for the City of Aventura Commission, which she won in March of 2005. She was re-elected unopposed in 2010 and served through term limits till November 2014. In 2013 and again in 2018, then Florida Governor, now Senator Rick Scott, appointed her to the Miami-Dade Expressway Authority, the state transportation agency that governs the county's 5 toll highways. She was elected treasurer of MDX last year. Since 2010, Luz has been a construction impact mitigation specialist with notable projects under her command, including the Port of Miami Tunnel, Brickell City Center, Esplanade at Aventura, the $2 billion site Sea Dam Clean Energy Project in British Columbia, Canada, and many more. As Vice President of the National Association of Latino elected and appointed officials, Luz was very active in the 2010 census, advocating for a full count. Today, to share this important history, information, timelines, deadlines on the 2020 census, I really want to welcome Honorable Luz Weinberg.
Thank you, Gladys. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you for the opportunity to talk to your followers about the 2020 census and its importance, again, on this decennial.
It is a real pleasure. And I know that the census is extremely important, but people are not taking it as serious as it has to be.
Yes, for a number of reasons. There's either fear or just lack of interest or not knowing fully its importance, which is platforms like this so important. That's why platforms like this are so important for us to share the importance of it and assuage any other potential fears that might be out there.
So let me start by asking you if you can please tell us the story of the census.
The census is like my favorite story because it's an ancient story that goes back all the way back to William the Conqueror in the year 1086, where he was first noted to have been inscribed in that Book of Doom. Some of you might be familiar on the infamous Book of Doom. And he counted, back then, England was counting only landowners. The Bible mentions counting. Babylonians, Romans, the Chinese, Egyptians, there's historical data showing that there was some kind of enumeration for the counting of the population. Now, Article 1, Section 2 of our United States Constitution actually calls for an enumeration of the populace every 10 years. So it's a sexy story that goes back thousands of years, this importance of counting.
But you know what? For example, when I was little in Colombia, every 10 years there was a census, but we had to stay home. Yes. Nobody was allowed to leave their houses. It was like a toque de queda, right, like a curfew. And yes, nobody was allowed to leave the houses. It was a Sunday, and people went from door to door counting, and there was a sticker on the door.
Yes,
and it was for 1 day. So I was shocked that here it's like a whole year.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up, Gladys, because for those of us who grew up in Latin American countries, I spent time in the Dominican Republic, and Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is US, of course, but in the Dominican Republic, very much like Colombia, Census Day was sacred, and it is on a weekend. And much like we do voting in Latin American countries, where voting takes place on the weekend to ensure that everyone does participate and go out to vote. Census Day was a sacred day in our Latin American countries, much like you mentioned in Colombia, and you had to stay home. And the census workers came knocking on the doors and sat with you in your questionnaire and asked you exactly who was home. In the United States, it's a more broad, it takes a lot longer. There are ample opportunities. And now as we move into an age of technology for the 2020 census, we're seeing the online filling out of your questionnaire. I mean, we've made it easier and less costly by doing so. But yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. It'll be interesting to see how Latin American countries have actually changed their counting as we have moved into this age of technology. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because in the United States, we were actually the first modern country to count all of its citizens. Like I mentioned, back in the William the Conqueror days, only landowners were counted. We've had race qualifications differences over the years in the census. So the census has evolved, but we were the first modern country to count all of its citizens. We were the first country to constitutionally mandate that citizens be counted every 10 years. And the United States was also the very first country to make the counting, the number that you come up with, directly apportioned it to its political power and representation, which is our conversation today. One of the two topics of what makes the census very important, and in my words, very sexy, because it's a story about money and power. So the US was the first country in the world to use the census data to apportion political power.
But wait a second, you just said that the US was the first one to count everyone. How are they sure that they literally counted everyone?
Okay, well, that's a struggle by the Census Bureau every day, every year, every 10 years. The Census Bureau doesn't just pop up every 10 years. I mean, there's continuous work that goes on every year. And the way that we make sure that everyone is indeed counted is by us, the populace, the actual population, ensuring that you are counted, that you take that questionnaire seriously, that when it arrives in the mail this decennial, I was so impressed by how it all went down, because I remember in 2010 when I received my questionnaire, I was sitting down in my office, bubbling in all the information, folding this piece of paper and sending it in the mail. Did it really arrive? Did it get lost? Did it get damaged? There's a fear of, did I really get counted? So you will always have a margin of error as to whether or not even those who submitted their census information were counted. Now, it being online, it became all that much easier. It literally took me 4 minutes to go through the 5 different pages that there were on them. And that's, by the way, mycensus2020.com. Okay. To fill out the questionnaire.
Let me ask you something. The question about race. Why?
So the racial definition on the census has like wildly evolved over each decennial in the last 22 censuses we've gone through since 1790. Initially, it was just black and white. You were either black or you were white, which back then, unfortunately, meant a white American or a slave. There were arguments and political discord over the years as to whether even slaves were to be counted. So that's the race issue goes back to when we first started counting. In 1900, mulattoes became a definition of race in that decennial census. So it was black, white, or mulatto. And then that was the only decennial that they did it. Then it was removed. There was a time in the US when there was even a quadroon or an octoroon, which meant you were a quarter black or an eighth black. I mean, it's insane. There was a decennial where Hindu was a racial definition. There was the decennials were Korean, Asian. So race continues to evolve each decennial. And I think it's just representative of where the population might be. Last decennial in 2010, we had for us Latinos to identify as either Spanish, Latino, or Spanish, being actually from Spain. Hispanic or Latino being a point of contention amongst the Hispanic Latino population, because it's like, what is the difference between the two? So there's never, there's never been a census that has come without much discord or discussion about the issue of race. So, and right now in this decennial census, you're seeing the black, or the standard races that you usually find, and then a definition as to whether you're of Hispanic background, Asian Pacific, etc. So it's also important for those folks tracking the race data in America that we do identify ourselves properly, black, white, Hispanic, Latino, or whatever the definition is. But it's important people understand that race will continue, unfortunately, to be a topic of discussion and identification because we are such a culturally diverse country. So rather than resenting the fact that we have to identify ourselves somehow, it's important that we do identify ourselves with pride also.
Because this time around, it identifies if you're Latin or Hispanic, which is one of the questions that I have, the difference between Latin and Hispanic. I heard one time that calling somebody Latin was a bad word, which I don't understand why, but we'll talk about that in a second. But now we have to identify Latin or Hispanic from where we come from originally, right?
Yes.
So
yes,
this
correct.
is one question.
I'll tell you, it is not my favorite topic of discussion, and we could actually have a whole conversation about the difference between Hispanic and Latino. But we were, and I say we because I work so closely with the National Association of Latino Elected Officials, NALEO, back in 2010 when I was seriously immersed in the 2010 and advocating for a full count. And we were part of the national discussion that introduced those identifications and the fact that the census will be also available in Spanish. So it's a broader conversation for a later time, but just know that it is important for yourself to identify if you are of Hispanic descent and which country.
There is a bet on the side that the Colombians are gonna be more after the census than the Cubans.
Oh, wow, I did not know about that. Okay.
Yeah, there is a bet that there's gonna be more, or they're gonna fight the first place, the first and second by very near.
For those of you who don't know, Gladys is Colombian, so she's rooting for that.
So I'm curious about how that's gonna be.
I'm just happy we have folks from all over the world that make up our beautiful United States. And I just want to make sure that everybody does get themselves counted.
Yeah, me too. So let me ask you, when you told us a little bit about the history, which I didn't know that it went really way back, but when did it start in the US?
So our first decennial census was in 1790. So then you start counting from there. So 1790, 1800, 1810. And there was a cute story, it's not coming to my mind now, about when we were what was considered very first to be counted. I touched a little on the issue on the unfortunately with the slavery, but let's say we have evolved as a nation on what and who gets counted, where now everyone gets counted. Literally the question on the census is who sleeps or who was sleeping in your house as of April 1st, like who lived in your home. If there was a body with organs breathing in your home as of April 1st, that person gets counted. So, and interestingly enough, also this decennial evolved for the diverse families that we have, for the multiple families that live in a home. So I was able to check off that my youngest son who lives with me also lives with his father, and then make a notation of that so that they're not double counting or under counting. So the census evolves from the very first time we did it in 1790 to now be very inclusive and ensure that everyone gets counted, but not twice.
Got it. So let's move on, because in 2010, you talked about the census being sexy. So what was that all about?
Yeah, that was a fun day that day. The regional census office here in South Florida had invited me to come do their ribbon cutting and give a little speech to launch off their efforts. And I said the census was sexy. It's about money and it's about power. The census decides two things: how much funding our communities get, and that means states and local communities, and how many representatives our districts get in the House of Congress. So it's a story about money and power. So I said, what's not sexy about money and power? So they loved it at that time, and it became my speech sort of as I hit different media outlets and community events, trying to get people excited about participating in something that is sexy. So that's where that came from. Money and power. And if you want, I can break down the two.
That was my next question, because yes, it sounds very sexy, but now you need to put it in perspective.
So in Florida, we were very excited back in 2010 because the estimated census counts was putting us to potentially gain two seats in the House. As everyone knows, there are 435 seats in the House of Representatives. They're decided by population districts. The Senate is its own animal. You get 2 senators per state, no matter if you're as big as Texas or as tiny as Rhode Island or Maine, you get 2 senators per state. But for the House of Representatives, those seats are decided by your population in your districts. So in Florida, we stood to gain 2 seats, which we did. The state of Texas stood to gain 4 seats, which they did. 4 seats, that's population growth and redistricting, which happened. So in total, in 2010 census, 8 states gained seats, where 10 states lost seats. So it is very important. You can see now and start to see why, especially the legislatures of each state get nervous around census time, and they try to really, really get a full count of what their constituency looks like. Because if you're undercounted, there are, then my second point, which is the money point, there are serious funding federal dollars that are now going to come down to your communities because your numbers are not correct. So by us gaining seats, we're also gaining some fundings because that meant we had more population growth. There was actually only one state in the 2010 census that actually had under growth, which was Michigan. They had a 0.6% deficiency or population lost decrease from the 2000 census to the 2010. But continuously over the years, you see more growth. But when it comes to the redistricting of the population, 8 states gained seats in 2010. And just an interesting fact, everybody loves New York City. I go there often, family, work.
Let me interrupt you 1 second before you tell that, because you're very passionate and your camera is cutting your head.
Oh, it is? Okay, well,
your camera a little bit.
That's the bad part of my hair. I don't need that to show anyway. That's the pelitos. I won't come down.
Okay, now go your camera feels a little up. Perfect. So now tell us.
For the last 22 censuses we've had, the city of New York City, has been the largest city in the US, with the last 2010 census counting 8.2 million inhabitants. If you add the second, third, and fourth largest city in the US, which is LA, Chicago, Philadelphia, shout out to my niece, Christy in Chicago, and my family in California. If you add all 3 of those cities, they don't equate to the population of New York, which continues to be the largest in the census each decennial. So that's
New York as just New York City or New York State? City.
Interesting. I'm glad you asked that, because interestingly enough, in the 2010 census, the state of New York actually lost 1 seat in the House of Representatives to the population count and redistricting. So yeah, the fact that New York City continues to be large, remember that the actual state of New York, a lot of it is not really populated and smaller towns. But the city of New York itself continues each decennial to be the largest city in the US. So they do their counting. So that's in terms of population growth. The importance comes to power. So your political apportionment, how you're represented in the United States House of Congress, in the United States House of Representatives in the Congress, comes from your census counts. So that's the PowerPoint, the PowerPoint of my sexy census push.
So bottom line, for somebody that wants it very clear, basically more representatives means one more or two more votes in the House of Representatives.
Oh, absolutely. And who wouldn't want that? I mean, for your state, you want as much representation as possible. And you also want your representation to be representative of your populace. So yeah, so if you're going back to the race issue and ethnicities, if Florida's growth is 21 million, I think it's our current population in the state of Florida, and we have a certain percentage of Hispanic and a certain percentage of Asians, et cetera. As those districts are redrawn after the population count, you want to perhaps give an opportunity for those folks that represent you to win seats in Congress. So now we have 2 available seats in the 2010 census. Our state of Florida grew by 2 seats, and perhaps those are 2 seats that can be representative of the ethnicity changes within our state. So that's very important.
That's extremely important.
And to put things in perspective, so I mentioned Florida's population being 21 million plus right now. The 2010 census, the population growth from the 2000 census to 2010 in the United States was 9.7%, or 27,323,000, I think 297. So we're 21 million. The population growth from 2000 to the 2010 census was almost like you take the whole state of Florida and the state of New York, and I mean the city of New York, and combine them. That's how many more people were part of the country over a 10-year span. Just to put things in perspective, the growth of our country, which is with each decennial.
So tell me now a little bit about the money. Like, how can we link it to the money?
Okay, so that's my second favorite part. So representation, of course, politically being the first. So, and I'll start with the cost of the census, just to give you an idea. The very first census in 1790 cost all of $44,000, which I'm sure back then was a lot of money. The 2010 census put a price tag of $12.9 billion in cost to put out, receive, count. That's a fraction of the monies that are actually dished out by how we count the population. So the story of money in the census and money are distributed, there are 675 billion with a B, $675 billion of federal funding directly tied to the United States Census every decennial. Those are monies that are distributed to the 50 states and all of our communities based on our population size. Programs like my favorite, being a transportation official, the Department of Transportation relies on dollars from the census. The Department of Urban Development, HUD, relies on census dollars. There are programs directly linked. There are over 100 programs that are directly linked to federal funding that comes out of the numbers of the census, including some educational programs like school lunches. So if the representation and the power piece didn't grab you to resonate the importance of the census, then the money piece definitely has to, because if your community is undercounted and you are not going to get a certain percentage of the dollars you should have gotten, then those are services and programs you're not going to be able to provide to your community.
Wait a second, you mentioned only in education, the food, but it's also linked to the education program.
Oh, of course, yeah.
The lunch program or the
yes.
food program that comes with the education.
Mm-hmm. Federal funding comes down from the federal government down to the communities in variations, and education is one of them. And that's a whole conversation we could have on that alone, on the various different programs that are funded through the federal government, which again are directly linked to the numbers of residents that your communities have reported or have counted. So I can't stress that enough. The money piece becomes so very important, because that is how you as an elected official, how me as an elected official that I used to be, and now a transportation official, that is how some of the, we are self-sustaining at MDX, but That is how some programs, the state of Utah, for example, rely heavily in the federal funding that comes from the census for their transportation programs. I mean, there's also a gas tax situation going on with them there, but they rely heavily on those funds. Most of our states rely heavily on federal funding to build and maintain our 4.1 million miles of roads that we have in the United States. So, and I'm throwing a lot of numbers out there, but the numbers that will matter at the end of the day will be how many of us exist in this country today as of April 1 when we filled out the census. That is really the number that people should be concentrating on. I'm a number. I want to be in that count. So when I get my questionnaire in the mail, which everyone that's listening should have gotten already, it's the questionnaire and you have your PIN code. And when you go to mycensus2020.com, you can actually log in, put in your code, and fill out the census from the comfort of your own home and hit submit and feel great about the fact that you as a number, your family as a number, whether it's 3 of you, 5 of you, or 10 of you in your household, as of April 1, you were counted. That's the important number.
Can you give us a little more, like name 5 of the programs that are funded by the government for some people that actually don't know?
Well, so I gave you the 2 big
transportation. Yeah, besides transportation.
I gave you the 2 big departments, actually 3. So if you go into the census website, because there are hundreds of programs, there's over 100 programs. So concentrate on the Department of Education. That should be huge because we want our children to get a good education. We want our communities to have the money to pay for these programs, not just rely solely on our property taxes that go to our school boards. The Housing and Urban Development, we know the programs like Title VIII, the programs that assist the elderly who can't afford their rent, et cetera. And we know, of course, my favorite with the Department of Transportation, the very badly needed programs and services that we need for our roads, because that's how we move. If you can move services and goods and your products, then, you know, where are we as a nation? So, but I do want to, if you hashtag, you put it on the intro, right, for the census website, it is polluted with information on the programs specifically.
Can you explain the title?
But think of this, if your child is sitting in a classroom and your child is going to the cafeteria and eating lunch, and you are driving your child on a roadway to get to that school, those monies are coming from whether or not you got counted in the census. How's that?
That's a good way of putting it.
That's an analogy.
So wait, the census website is, because I'm putting the link, Census 2020.
MyCensus2020.gov will take you directly to census. My2020census.gov will take you directly to the questionnaire page, or if you hit home, then it'll take you to the actual census page, which has a ton of questions under the FAQs tab, which people, you know, well, I didn't respond to the 2020 census. What now? Are the mailings done? Or is somebody going to come knocking on my door? You know, what should I tell them? Am I exposed? You know, if I share information, are they going to ask me my social security? There's a whole lot of good questions, and we can get into. I have a little note I want to close with on the.
Before we go into those details, I want to ask you about the timeline.
Perfect. So work has been going, like I mentioned earlier, the Census Bureau doesn't just open their doors every decennial and start counting. No, it's work that's ongoing every year. And actually every year numbers tend to be updated. And then you have the states who do their own census and forecasts on populations. So the census work actually started last year, January of 2019. So from January of 2019 until about September of 2019, they open up all the census offices throughout. Like I mentioned, I was part of the regional opening of ours back in 2010. So the regional offices start to open, and those are folks that are, you know, manning the phones and, you know, preparing the questionnaires, organizing their canvassing folks. The canvassing, which is, you know, people actually going door to door in those low report areas, took place from about August to October 2019. And those are the folks that were making sure that the lists were, the neighborhoods and the lists were appropriate and ready for the counting. So now, January of this year, 2020, we really start counting. And the Census Bureau actually starts in Alaska. There's a little village called Tukuk, I think. And that's like the door-to-door counting. From March 12th to March 20th is when the questionnaires were mailed. So everyone that's on and is listening should have received one. And if you never received one, then that's when you need to call 1-800-923-8282. Call the Census Bureau and inquire, because you'll be able to give them your name and address, and they'll see whether or not a census was logged in for that address. But between March 12th and March 20th was the received timeline for the questionnaires.
Give me the number again so I can put it.
Sure. 1-800-923-8282.
9382.
923-8282. And it's also listed on the census.gov, US Census.gov website, along with all their FAQs.
Okay.
Now, April 1st, not April Fool's Day, April 1st is also Census Day. That is the hopeful day, where the census hopes that everyone has their preferred response date. So April 1st has always been known as Census Day. And it's the date, as I mentioned before, that on your questionnaire, it's the cutoff day, like who lived in your home as of April 1? How many people lived in your home? How many people slept in your home as of April 1? Not just that night, but how many people were actually living in your home as of April 1? So that's the census date, which already passed. Now let's fast forward to July 1st to September 3rd. That's when the Census Bureau goes out to the places that host large numbers of people, prisons, some schools, some of those like boarding schools or colleges, senior centers. Those are actual conversations had with the leaders of those centers to do full count of who's within them. Prisons, of course, being very important because some of those federal funds also go to some of our rehabilitation programs. So that's that timeline. Now, in the timeline we're in right now, from August 11th through September 30th is when the census does their follow-up work. September 30th is the deadline for reporting. So today is September 9th. You have 21 days, so 3 weeks to September 30th to fully get counted, to log on if you haven't, to dig out that questionnaire wherever you dumped it in your house when it arrived, if you didn't see it and didn't fill it out, or to call the census office and make sure that you are counted. That's the timeline on our responsibility for our response rate right now, before September 30th.
I was shocked. A little time ago, I asked how many people, what was the percentage of the response in Aventura? And we were growing slowly, but we're still under 60%. We're still under 60%. So why is it that the people are not filling this up? It takes 7 minutes. It just takes a little bit, and we need all the money we can get.
I sadly, I believe that not enough is done, and there is so much out in the media. The Census Bureau cannot do this alone, guys. It is us. Use social media for something other than posting your breakfast photo. Really talk about the census and push for your elderly, your family members that you know might not have access to a computer, or that don't typically pick up their mail, or did not think that the census was something that was important. It really is incumbent upon us as a society to instill the values to our society that getting counted is important. And if nothing is more important than power and money, if that conversation doesn't drive the point home, I really don't know what could. And it's very saddening to see that even within our own city of Aventura, we still continue to have a low response rate. There is no excuse for our numbers in the census to not be fully representative of what our community truly looks like. So let's impress ourselves rather than embarrass ourselves and get ourselves counted. Post about it right now, hashtag census 2020 or hashtag 2020 census. Shame your friend that says, oh, I never filled that out. Shame them, just like the people that say, oh, I never vote. No, it is a responsibility to engage in your civic duties. And much like voting, counting yourself on the census is a huge civic responsibility constitutionally afforded to you as a mandate to get yourself counted. So let's get it done. September 30th is the deadline. So back to the timeline, from 9:30 to 12:31 is when all the tabulation and the counting gets done. By mandate, on December 31st is the date that the United States Census Bureau takes the counting over to Congress. And those numbers are set in stone, they're ratified. This is it. These are the numbers that are going to decide how your states are represented in Congress and how much federal funding each of your communities are going to receive. And that happens from December 30th until March 31st, those 3 months. Some of you might have heard some stuff in the news right now about that timeline being extended, et cetera. I don't want to get into the political nuances of the census, because my goal is to get people counted and for you to understand the timeline. And right now, the important date was April 1st. Still is if you're filling it out, because that is the date, who was living at home with you, and September 30th being your deadline. If you want to get counted, if you want your child to have that school lunch as every time, and you want your roadways to continue operating the way that they are, then please get counted.
Okay, so let me ask you something. The knocking on doors, where does it start? Like, where does it follow it within the timeline?
So right now, it's still going on. You may end up having a census. Yeah, the self-response deadline is September 30th. You may still have folks come knocking on your door. And they tend to do that on low response rate communities, and they know who those communities are. And unfortunately, they do tend to be lower income communities. Surprisingly too, look at Aventura. I think perhaps being the vertical community that we are, it's difficult for, we have 92 high rises for Census Bureau. Yeah, sorry, it was 95 back when I ran in 2005. So it might be a little more difficult it will take a census worker literally a few days to go door to door to door to door to a building that might have 400 plus units, et cetera, versus the walking. I can't explain it. It's just still very sad. But it is still going on those low response rate communities, the knocking on the door, and census safety points, please. Census workers will come to your house from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., not sooner, not later. Census workers will have a census bag with them that no one else has, a census ID, most importantly, and they'll have a letter from the Census Bureau identifying who they are and their purpose. They will never ask to come into your home. They will ask you the census questions at your door. Because of COVID, naturally, no, do not invite them into your home. That wouldn't be wise. I wouldn't want anybody coming into my home. They definitely have to take their shoes off. But they will never ask. A census worker with an ID, a bag, and a letter from the Census Bureau will never ask to come into your home. They will ask your questions at the door, and that is that. So please practice census safety. They will never ask you for your social security number, how much income you earn, bank account numbers. They will not get into any kind of financial information. So do not give anyone any that comes knocking claiming to be from the Census Bureau.
That's the problem that some of the people are having, that they're impersonating census workers to get your information. So thank you for clarifying everything.
Yes,
that they are not asking that. And then the next question is, because I've heard, I know that we have an immigration problem, and I don't want to get into this. I don't want you to get into this.
Sure.
But I know that a lot of people are not even answering the phone because they're afraid that they're going to be identified as not legal immigrants, and they
Yes.
can be deported or they can be told on. So what happens in this case? Because they also need to be counted, but it's a complicated issue.
In my opinion, they do need to get counted. And again, that is another one of the unfortunately many points about the census that become politicized every decennial. This isn't new to the 2020 census. Last decennial in 2010, the issue of whether or not undocumented residents of the United States should be counted on the census was also a thing. It is a thing again today. My feeling on that subject, personal, is that anyone who resides in your community and is attending your schools and is contributing to sales tax and everything that they do in your community should get counted, because at the end of the day, your community is still providing services. If those funds are not coming in because your community was undercounted due to fears of deportation or reporting, then you're not servicing your community. You're doing the community a disservice because the funds are not going to be there. So undocumented residents of the United States are here. They're a thing, and they should be counted so that we properly represent ourselves and our communities in Congress, and we properly receive the federal funding dollars we need in order to keep our communities thriving. But yes, that is probably the key or worse a point about the census, and what instills some of the fears that yes, you don't want someone coming to knock on your door if you're hosting undocumented residents in your home, and you don't want to count them whether they live there April 1 or have lived there the entire time. So the message would be then to those folks, they're still residing there. The fear should be whether or not you get counted to have power and money sent down to your communities. That to me is the real fear, or should be the real fear.
Anything we can do about it so that everybody can pass beyond that fear?
Unfortunately, probably not a whole lot. Again, I would go back to the communicating, the using social media platforms for a good for once, or not for once, I shouldn't say that. There's plenty good that goes around, but there's also plenty of clutter that's just not necessary. Instead, push for full count, hashtag full count, hashtag get counted, hashtag hágase contar for our Spanish friends. That was one of Naleo's campaigns back then in 2010 and again in 2020. Ya es hora was one of our national campaigns with Univision, hágase contar, it's time, get counted. So driving the message to our communities in Espanol, in Creole, in Francois, in French, however we can, that regardless of your immigration status, you should count everyone in your home for the 2020 census.
We have a few minutes left, but if you want to close it, because this was really interesting, I hope that we can reach everyone. So please, bottom line, get counted, fill it. It only takes, you took 4 minutes, it took me 7 minutes.
I was like, click, 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 click.
It took me 7 minutes. I did it way, way back, so I hope everybody gets counted. So you want to leave everybody with a message?
Yes, hashtag get counted. Elected leaders of our communities at every city council meeting, every meeting of you might have a board meeting, if you serve on a board of a nonprofit, every platform opportunity that you have to get in front of a body or a group of people, tell them to get themselves counted. Did you fill out the census? Shame on you if you haven't. Fill out the census. mycensus2020.com.gov, census, uscensus.gov. The platforms and opportunities and resources are endless right now. There is literally no excuse, unfortunately, other than fear of apprehension, of deportation. There is really no excuse for you not to get yourself counted. And please practice census safety, especially during these times of COVID, if you do get a knock on your door. There are several FAQs on the census website, so I probably won't get into those. So you can just go visit them. but one of the typical questions does tend to be, I'm getting an email, or I got an email, or I'm getting a phone call, or somebody came knocking on my door, even though I already filled out the census. That's okay. That could happen. Just confirm with them and inform them that you have filled it out. That's it. And if they are calling you, then that's even a good thing, because that means they're really trying to confirm that they have everyone. So that could still happen if you filled it out. Like I filled mine out the last week of March, like as soon as I got it in the mail. But maybe I'll get a call. So if you do get a call or somebody comes actually knocking on your door, because perhaps you live in a low response rate community, and there are many of those, sadly, do just confirm with them that you have filled it out. And talk to everyone you can. Forget big groups of people and platforms. If you pick up lunch at Burger King drive-thru today, hey, fill out your census. Did you get counted? It's just so critical. I can't stress enough. Money that goes to your communities and power, political seats that represent you in Congress is gathered through those numbers that are reported each decennial at the census. So much like, to go back to your beginning intro, Gladys, when you mentioned in Colombia, and my growing up in the Dominican Republic, where Census Day was like sacred. You didn't go anywhere. Treated as such here in the United States. Census is a sacred tool for your benefit in your communities.
But you mentioned something that I don't think other people can realize, is the nonprofit organizations can also have some funds based on the census.
Yeah, if you're a nonprofit that receives federal funding, chances are some of those federal fundings are coming from there. So absolutely.
Or you can apply for federal funding.
There are federal, yes, yeah. If you hear the word federal funds, assume it's probably coming from your numbers. $675 billion to be exact. That's a lot of money that your communities could use. So that means you have to get
many zeros.
Correct.
Luz,
yeah.
thank you.
Thank you for this opportunity.
So much. Please, everybody that's listening to us, share this video. Ask, like Luz said, in the driveway in McDonald's. Just tell everyone.
And Gladys, I want to commend you for putting this as one of your conversations with Gladys pieces for this Wednesday. It's a serious issue. So I praise you for taking the initiative to say, hey, Luz, you're like the census girl. Can we talk about the census? So yes, I jumped at the opportunity because it is just that important. And I trust all your followers and listeners and the folks who will download or watch the video later will really resonate with them. And if they have not filled it out, say, hey, Gladys and Luz said, fill out your census. You have till 9:30.
Thank you. And with this, I leave you all. I see everyone next week on Wednesday at 11. Our guest will be candidate for mayor, Daniela Levin Cava.
And I'll close by saying the message behind, which sits underneath my map of the world in my dining room: be the change you wish to see in the world. Wise words by Gandhi. Be the change you wish to see in the world. Be the change you wish to see in the census 2020. Get counted. Thank you.
Thank you. Be safe.
Bye.